That may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
Okay, we're going to go through. We are going to be talking about our wide receiver rankings. Of course, we've already gone through our running back rankings, and just like in our running back rankings, we are going to be talking about some gross options making it in the top 24. I mean, you have a ton of great teams on bye. I mean, teams like the Dallas Cowboys, the Los Angeles Chargers, also a few more elite offenses that we are going to be missing out from this week. So we're going to have to go pretty deep here. We will be ranking our top 24 wide receivers. But of course, before we do that, we have to go over and we have to give away some Fantasy Flock Network hats. We're going to be pulling up our last video right now. That way I can just pick out 2 random winners. You probably just heard me pull up that video. And this first winner going to come out from Shoddy, who says, "Take me to the moon, brother. Running back this week is looking like a straight L." My friend, well, running back may be looking like an L, but at least you won a Fantasy Flock Network hat. Okay, let's grab that screenshot. And our next one coming out from Ryan says, "You have helped me greatly improve my record. Thank you for the help." No, thank you so much for supporting the channel, my friend. And you just got yourself a Fantasy Flock Network hat, even though if that's your real Twitter profile or YouTube profile, whatever the hell that is. Looks like you have a full head of hair. Maybe not even need the hat. But I think that should be it. Oh yeah, one last thing is we updated our rest of season rankings over there on Patreon. Of course, you can go support the show on Patreon. You can get access to our group chat. You can get access to extra videos, get access to rest of season rankings, get access to some dynasty rankings, get access to a question and answer segment during those live streams exclusive to Patreon. So yeah, I think that should be it. Let's go through. Let's dive into this video. And let's start this off with everybody's wide receiver 1, or at least he should be everybody's wide receiver 1. Let's go over to Davante Adams. And while, yes, Davante Adams currently is not the wide receiver 1 in fantasy, if you're looking at a per game basis, actually currently sitting as the wide receiver 4 in fantasy. With Davante Adams, I mean, he has not come close. He hasn't come close to the ceiling that he actually has in fantasy football this year. I mean, this is a wide receiver that we know historically has a very high touchdown rate. It wasn't just a 2020 incident. I mean, you know that Davante Adams is someone going through his entire career. Let me pull this up really quick, but you are going to see from a per target standpoint, Davante Adams, based on his usage that he has in the red zone, this is someone scoring touchdowns at a very high rate. I mean, he had 18 touchdowns through 14 games in 2020. He had 13 touchdowns through 15 games in 2018, 10 touchdowns 2017, only in 14 games, 12 touchdowns in 2016 in 16 games. I mean, this is a wide receiver that you're expecting a considerable amount of touchdowns overall. Now, he is currently leading the NFL in both receptions and receiving yards this season, which is maybe something that you should expect from Davante Adams. However, he's only scored 2 touchdowns. Now, with this being said, we know what is the one thing that is most volatile week to week in fantasy football. It's going to be those touchdowns. They're going to go up and down, up and down, up and down. That very rarely can you identify a wide receiver that you can expect to have a much higher touchdown rate than others. Very rarely can you identify a wide receiver that should have a much lower touchdown rate than others. I mean, some examples, Davante Adams, we know that that touchdown rate is going to be very high. Keenan Allen, that touchdown rate will probably be below league average. But with that being said, I mean, you are going to get more red zone usage for Davante Adams. He will find the end zone just a little bit more. This is a wide receiver that has already an extremely high floor based on what we have seen so far this season. I think that you really have him just at his floor performance so far through the first 6 weeks. And from here, I think we're probably going to be seeing his ceiling. If you could right now trade Tyreek Hill, Cooper Kupp for him, of course, you're going to do that. The matchup against Washington, no reason to be worried this week in particular. Plug and play Davante Adams as your wide receiver 1. Now, our wide receiver 2 is going to be a little bit more of a volatile option. We're going to go with Tyreek Hill here as our wide receiver 2. Now, Tyreek Hill currently is behind Cooper Kupp in fantasy points per game. Now, the difference between these 2 wide receivers, we'll talk about both of them right now because they're clearly our wide receivers 2 and 3 as well. All of these are tier 1 wide receivers before we move down to tier 2. The difference between Tyreek Hill and Cooper Kupp is actually the matchups that they're going to be playing in this week. If you're going to be looking at that matchup for Cooper Kupp and the Los Angeles Rams, they're actually going up against the Detroit Lions. And I know the Detroit Lions, they have a very bad defense overall. This is a very bad team overall. And I think this is going to be a spot where most likely you get a considerable amount of usage for Darrell Henderson. I know that this past week against the Giants, the Los Angeles Rams blew them out. They put up a considerable amount of points. And of course, you're expecting a strong performance from Cooper Kupp. But I just think that if we're looking at these 2 games with the Rams and the Lions versus the Chiefs and the Titans, I think that once we get down to the fourth quarter, you're going to have it more likely that the Kansas City Chiefs are having to throw the ball with aggression than what you are going to be getting with the Los Angeles Rams. And with Tyreek Hill here, I mean, he is the exact opposite of Cooper Kupp, where Cooper Kupp has been the most consistent wide receiver in the NFL. I mean, if you're looking at his opportunity he's had in this offense, 10 targets, 11 targets, 12 targets, 13 targets, 10 targets, 12 targets. He's had 68 targets so far this year. Every single week, he's had over 10 targets. Whereas Tyreek Hill, I mean, this is a wide receiver that you're seeing some massive peaks. I mean, 37 points against the Browns in week 1, 47 points at the Philadelphia Eagles in week 4. Yeah, you have some duds in there as well. You have the Ravens in week 2. Keep in mind, a lot of people weren't necessarily wanting to cover this, even though we were talking about it nonstop, that in that Ravens game, Tyreek Hill didn't play his usual number of snaps. He was dealing with a shoulder injury. Really hard to hold that against him. But even then, I mean, he had the down week against the Chargers in week 3 as well. Not a great week in week 5 against the Buffalo Bills. So definitely a wider range of outcomes. I just like the game flow a little bit more, and I don't even want to say we like the offense more than what you have with the Detroit Lions versus the Los Angeles Rams. I bet the Rams probably put up as many points, but I think the Rams could lean on the run a little bit more than what you would expect with the Kansas City Chiefs. Now let's go down to our next tier because everybody knows you play those guys. Let's go down to our wide receiver 4 here. And this is someone that we are telling every single person. I mean, you know, we live stream every night. And if you come out to those live streams, you've probably saw a pretty strong trend. And that is me going through and telling everyone, start Calvin Ridley. Start Calvin Ridley, trade for Calvin Ridley, trade for Calvin Ridley. I mean, this is someone that is a no-brainer top 5 option this week against the Miami Dolphins. We know with Atlanta versus Miami, this is a game that can easily turn into a shootout. Now, if we're going to be looking at implied team totals, I'd imagine that Vegas honestly doesn't have the implied team total that high for this week between these two teams. But keep in mind, these are also offenses that really aren't necessarily looking to go through and run the ball effectively. I mean, that's not really the game plan of the Miami Dolphins or really the Atlanta Falcons. Both of these are teams that are going to be dropping back to pass consistently. And right now, you actually have Atlanta top 10 in the NFL this week with their implied team total. If you're going to be looking at this Atlanta Falcons offense, I mean, here you actually have Calvin Ridley so far this season as a high-end wide receiver 3 on a points per game basis. I mean, he hasn't been that great, but keep in mind, this is someone very similar to what we were talking about with Davante Adams. Historically, we've seen a very high touchdown rate for Calvin Ridley. However, this season, he's had 42 targets and only 1 touchdown scored. That 100% is going to be going in the opposite direction. This is an option that's very consistent with a high floor, and I think we really have not seen a ceiling yet in fantasy football. I mean, he's had 42 targets through 4 weeks. He's had 2 weeks off. I think it's just wheels up for Calvin Ridley in what should be a high-scoring offense that's heavily leaning on the pass. Now, our next wide receiver, I'm not going to lie, this next ranking was pretty hard for me. We'll talk about both wide receivers. They are the last 2 players in this tier for us. We have DeAndre Hopkins and DJ Moore. Right now, I am going to be ranking DeAndre Hopkins at wide receiver 5. Now, if you're going to be looking at Hopkins, so far it's hard to look at his production this season and what we've had in a vacuum and say, oh, okay, this is what we can expect going forward. Because if we just put this into context, with DeAndre Hopkins, I mean, you actually had him injuring his ribs in week 2. Then he was a game time decision in week 3. In week 4, he was going up against the Rams and Jalen Ramsey, still dealing with that rib injury. So really, we've only had 3 fully healthy weeks from DeAndre Hopkins so far this season. That was week 1 against the Titans, where he scored 26 points. And week 5 against the 49ers, where he scored 20 points. Week 6 against the Browns, where he scored 20 points. And that production looks fantastic. I mean, that production looks great. But if we also take into consideration how he's getting used and how he's actually getting there with that production, it's a little concerning. Because in week 1, 2 touchdowns. In week 5, a touchdown. In week 6, 2 touchdowns. So those 3 healthy weeks, he's actually scored 5 touchdowns. And of course, you like to see that, but it's not going to be able to maintain over the long haul. If you're actually looking at the opportunity that he has had in this offense, he's actually been averaging 7 targets a game. Now, keep in mind, when you're getting 7 targets for DeAndre Hopkins and a Kyler Murray-led Arizona Cardinals passing attack, that is naturally going to come with more efficiency than what you would have with, say, someone with the New York Giants situation. But still, the volume isn't necessarily there. The matchup against the Houston Texans is also one that you wouldn't necessarily expect that the Arizona Cardinals are going to have to push the pace of play in the second half. Now, in the case of DJ Moore, we're going to get yet another week without Christian McCaffrey here. Now, DJ Moore has been really getting utilized everywhere on the football field. I mean, they've actually given him 5 carries at the same time this season. He's had 63 targets, so he's averaging more than 10 targets a game. The production has been a little down over the past 2 weeks, where he scored about 9 points against the Eagles, 13 points against the Vikings. That was off of 20 targets total between those two contest. Going up against the Giants this week, also a very bad defense, where this matchup between the Giants and the Carolina Panthers actually may be a little closer. So you know what? As we talk through these wide receivers, I actually think we talked ourselves up to having DJ Moore at wide receiver 5, DeAndre Hopkins down there at wide receiver 6. So that's going to be the flip we're making. I even have DJ Moore ranked higher than DeAndre Hopkins, I believe, in our rest of season rankings. So let's have DJ Moore at wide receiver 5, DeAndre Hopkins as wide receiver 6 as the last two guys in this tier. Now let's go down to our next tier, and let's start it off with our wide receiver 7, someone that I have not drafted really in any leagues. Y'all know this was someone on our do not draft list. A lot of people are getting worried, and I'm saying, okay, maybe this is a good spot to buy low. Terry McLaurin. Now, here with Terry McLaurin, I know that a lot of people are disappointed over the past 2 weeks. I mean, he had 8.6 points against the New Orleans Saints. He had 6.8 points against the Kansas City Chiefs. Well, yeah, that's not exactly what you drafted Terry McLaurin for. The opportunity, the role in the offense is still there. I mean, he had 19 targets over the past 2 weeks. This is someone that's averaged over 9 targets a game so far this season. Now, if you're looking at Terry McLaurin, yes, those targets should come at a little bit of a lower efficiency mark, knowing the overall offensive environment that he's playing in. But against the Green Bay Packers here, it's actually a very strong matchup. I mean, when you're not going to have Jair Alexander, this Green Bay Packers defense is completely different. Now, this game is not going to be competitive, and that's going to make it where Washington has to consistently throw. So I know a lot of people are worried about Terry McLaurin. Personally, I'm really not going to be. I think we just plug and play Terry McLaurin as wide receiver 7 this week, and also an intriguing spot to buy low because you may get Ryan Fitzpatrick coming back sometime soon. Now, let's go over to our number 1 buy low wide receiver from a week ago. Now, it's going to be a lot harder to go through and actually get him at a reasonable price, but let's look at A.J. Brown as our wide receiver 8. Yes, we're going to have A.J. Brown as our wide receiver 8. Keep in mind that you actually have Julio Jones considered day-to-day right now. This is more so a ranking assuming that Julio Jones may be limited or Julio Jones may not play in this contest. Of course, I'm recording this on October 20th this morning, so we will be just further looking at those practice reports later on in the week, and we'll be giving those updates in the live streams every single night. Just make sure you're subscribed to the channel. But this past week, coming back, A.J. Brown did A.J. Brown things. I mean, we've discussed this so many times before. A.J. Brown leads this team in targets. A.J. Brown comes out and he shows us that he's a very good wide receiver. 7 receptions, 91 receiving yards, 9 targets against the Buffalo Bills. Now, this week in particular, we're going to go against the Kansas City Chiefs. And last week, I embarrassed myself with our aggressive ranking of Terry McLaurin, knowing how great this Kansas City Chiefs matchup looked on paper. The week before that, I embarrassed myself with how aggressively we ranked Stephon Diggs against this Kansas City Chiefs defense at the same time. And honestly, I kind of want to be staying with that, because if you take out this Washington performance this past week, keep in mind Washington, a bad team to begin with, also dealing with a multitude of injuries, and we ignore that and we just look at what we have had through the other 5 games so far this season for the Kansas City Chiefs. You had 29 points scored by the Browns, 36 points by the Ravens, 30 points against the Chargers, 30 points with the Philadelphia Eagles, and 38 points with the Buffalo Bills. So on average, I mean, you actually have the Cleveland Browns letting up like 35 points a game against opposing offenses here. I mean, this defense is one of the worst defenses in the NFL. Also, we know with the Kansas City Chiefs, this is something we talk about a lot, but their offense will put up points on the board, making the opponent go through and throw the ball rather than just lean on the run. Now, when you have Derrick Henry, that's hard to say. I mean, we said this in the live stream last night, but the lawyers for the Fantasy Flock Network, they actually contacted me and they told me if I ever speak negatively about Derrick Henry again, YouTube will have no choice but to come down and shut down our channel. So I'm not going to be able to say anything bad about Derrick Henry here, but I would imagine that if this game gets out of hand, if you have the Tennessee Titans trailing by 2 touchdowns in the second quarter, you can get a ton of passing volume in the direction of A.J. Brown against a soft defense. Now let's go over to our next wide receiver, which will be Deebo Samuel, the last option in this tier. Deebo Samuel, not a player that we loved coming into the season. I'm going to be making this ranking right here, operating under the assumption that Jimmy Garoppolo will be starting. Now, you know I love Trey Lance for fantasy purposes, but very similar to why we love Jalen Hurts. Not because his passing volume, not because what it'll give you from a fantasy football context, but his rushing upside. So if Trey Lance is starting here, we are going to be bumping Deebo Samuel down. But from a points per game standpoint, Deebo Samuel currently is the wide receiver 3 in fantasy. Now, a lot of this production has been fueled off some very long gains from Deebo Samuel. that are not predictive going forward. But with that being said, this is someone that is averaging over 5 targets a game. This is someone that's also had 6 carries through 5 contests at the same time. Clearly, they're doing everything they can to get him the ball. And yeah, he's the wide receiver 3 in fantasy, so it doesn't really matter. I mean, if we were lower on him compared to consensus coming into the year because we were a little bit worried about the injury history. But yeah, no, I have to admit, we had Brandon Ayuk ranked higher than Deebo Samuel coming into the season. But obviously, we just can't stand by that statement. We have to take that new information that we get. We have to go, okay, well, maybe we were wrong to have Brandon Ayuk ranked higher than Deebo Samuel, but Deebo Samuel is clearly a top 10 option here. Now let's go down a tier and let's go over to a wide receiver that I actually said would be an intriguing sell high candidate if we could go trade him for someone like Mike Williams, if we could go trade him for someone like Calvin Ridley. And let's go over to Antonio Brown. So if you go over to Patreon, you can of course find that link in the description of the video. You can actually see that we have Antonio Brown right now ranked as the wide receiver 1 in Tampa. Yes, we had to give in. We had to cave in because if you're looking at Antonio Brown, currently the wide receiver 7 on a points per game standpoint, he's doing this with volume. He's doing this with efficiency. This is one of the best passing offenses in the NFL. I mean, over the past 3 weeks, this is a wide receiver that's averaged over 10 targets a game. I mean, he also, through 6 weeks so far, I apologize, he actually missed week 3. So through 5 weeks so far, he's had 418 receiving yards, 4 receiving touchdowns. I mean, this is someone with 29 receptions. And at the end of the day, we know Antonio Brown is Antonio Brown. This is a dominant wide receiver who is the number 1 wide receiver in the NFL for a long duration of time. Now, yes, he's 33. He's no longer that same wide receiver he was. I mean, I'd imagine that if you had him literally being peak 2017 Antonio Brown and you plugged and played him with Tom Brady, he would probably put up Randy Moss level numbers. We're not expecting that, but I think we should be expecting wide receiver 1 production going forward, even if we're a little bit concerned with the volatility this offense may bring with the addition of Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, and Rob Gronkowski. Now, our wide receiver 11 will be Jamar Chase. Now, Jamar Chase has been incredible as of late. Now, he's going up against the Baltimore Ravens here. I mean, with Baltimore, it seems very hot and cold with what you're going to be getting from a matchup standpoint. Now, we're going to be looking at Jamar Chase. This is someone that over the past 2 weeks, I mean, he has been fantastic with his receiving volume. He actually had 97 receiving yards this past week at the Detroit Lions. He had almost 160 receiving yards the week before that, and this is with T. Higgins in the offense. Now, I will say, while this has been fantastic and it clearly shows us that Jamar Chase is a more talented wide receiver than T. Higgins for the long haul, I still think you will get some regression hitting a Jamar Chase, knowing that T. Higgins is taking a considerable amount of volume in this offense. They've been neck and neck, essentially tied for targets since T. Higgins has come back. The matchup against the Baltimore Ravens, really hard to know what we're going to be expecting. But yeah, I think Jamar Chase we have to have at wide receiver 11. Now, our next 2 guys at wide receiver 12, wide receiver 13 in this same tier will actually be Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. So yeah, I mean, with Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, I just think that both of these wide receivers against the Chicago Bears are going to be a little bit more volatile. I mean, you're going to have to start each of them, but if you're looking at what we have gotten in terms of the fantasy production throughout the season, I mean, it's up and down, where against the Eagles this past week, Mike Evans scores 4 fantasy points. Back in week 1, he scored 5.5. In the middle section, I mean, this is when you're getting a substantial amount of value, 24, 18, 14, 29. And you're going to see something very similar with Chris Godwin. I mean, this is a wide receiver that, yes, may be volatile, and this is kind of what you should expect. It's not going to be a Cooper Kupp type situation where Cooper Kupp's getting every single target in Los Angeles, where no, I mean, they are breaking this offense down pretty evenly between all these wide receivers, where you have some spike weeks for Chris Godwin, 25 points, 16 points, 19 points. You also have some weeks that are not as low as what you got from Mike Evans. Mike Evans is a little bit more dependent on that touchdown volume, but still pretty low. 8 points against the Patriots 2 weeks ago, 9 points against the Philadelphia Eagles this past week. I mean, you have also not necessarily had the target share that we were projecting for Chris Godwin coming into the season. I think you have to start all these options as high-end wide receiver 2s, just given the upside that they have in an offense that should be one of the most productive passing offenses in the NFL. But we should know that with the added target competition in this offense in particular, compared to a lot of others, that the range of outcomes with these guys will be a little bit wider and the volatility needs to be embraced. Now, let's kind of speed this up a little bit. Wide receiver 14 will be Courtland Sutton. Now, he's playing the Cleveland Browns on Thursday night, so I know a lot of people are going to be looking at this laughing one way or another. But with Courtland Sutton, this has been someone that's been fantastic with no Jerry Jeudy in this offense. I still think that he is someone that we possibly want to be selling in the long term if Jerry Jeudy will be missing. But still, I think for now, Courtland Sutton is just going to be a plug-and-play option. Now at 15, we are going to be having a Jalen Waddle against the Atlanta Falcons. Now y'all know Jalen Waddle was our number 1 buy low wide receiver a week ago. This was also someone we said was a must start option against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now with Jalen Waddle, I 100% need to be monitoring the Davante Parker practice reports. And I think with Waddle, this will be a fantastic matchup against the Atlanta Falcons. And we're ranking them as if Davante Parker may not play, Will Fuller may not play. And there you can expect Jalen Waddle to be a high-end wide receiver too. If Davante Parker is working his way back into this offense, which is completely possible for this week, you will be bumping Jalen Waddle down just slightly. And I'll say, even though we called him a buy low option a week ago, if he does come out, crush the Atlanta Falcons with no Davante Parker, I mean, if Will Fuller and Davante Parker come back in a few weeks, then maybe it'll be a good spot to buy low, get some elite production, sell high, and then move on to the next wide receiver. Now, our next wide receiver in this tier at 16 will be Robert Woods going up against the Detroit Lions. Yeah, Robert Woods had the breakout 2 weeks ago. I mean, right now he's currently the wide receiver 30 on the season. Of course, that's not fantastic. I mean, he had 14 targets back in week 5. This week in particular, a very poor performance against the New York Giants. He only had 5 targets, 2 receptions, 31 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown. Just going to be an offense that I think we need as many points that we can get going up against the Detroit Lions. You'd imagine that the Los Angeles Rams will be able to drop 30 points with Robert Woods in this offense, which will make him have some starter appeal. Now, our last wide receiver in this tier will be T. Higgins. I know we're going to be very aggressive on T. Higgins here. A lot of people would not be ranking him in this range. But if you're looking at the underlying numbers for T. Higgins in this offense, I think they're very encouraging against the Baltimore Ravens. I mean, yes, this can be something that goes either one way or another with the passing flow that you get with the overall game script. But still, T. Higgins has been almost neck and neck with what you've had with Jamar Chase in the target volume of the past 2 weeks. He had 6 targets a week ago, which, yes, that only led to 3 receptions, 44 receiving yards. But clearly, they have phased Tyler Boyd out of this offense. I think if you begin to get some of these targets going in the direction of the wide receivers, yet again from Joe Mixon and Chris Evans, I think this will be a nice spot against the Baltimore Ravens, where we'd imagine that the Ravens will be favored, forcing the Cincinnati Bengals to throw the ball. Now, let's drop it down one more tier. Let's go over to our wide receiver 18, which will be Sterling Shepard. Now, with Shepard here, I'm going to say this is a very fragile ranking. I mean, as soon as we get more information in, he will either be moving up or he will be moving down. I'd be very surprised if Sterling Shepard stays here. We just have no idea what to expect with Kenny Golladay, Saquon Barkley, Kadarius Toney, I mean, even Darius Slayton. But if you are looking at Sterling Shepard, this is someone that a week ago, when you had pretty much everybody out of this offense, he did see 14 targets against the Los Angeles Rams. The Panthers will be a better matchup overall. So yeah, I mean, I think we're just going to have to rank him here. We're going to have to say, you know what? This is more so a wait and see, because if you have nobody else in this offense, he probably has to go up to like wide receiver 16, wide receiver maybe even 14 ahead of Sutton, Waddle, and Woods. Now, our next wide receiver 19 here. I know a lot of people will be screaming at us, Mason, where is he? Where is he? Where is he? We got Brandon Cooks going up against the Arizona Cardinals. Now, I am very concerned in that if you're looking at the implied team totals according to Las Vegas, you right now have the Houston Texans projected to score the least amount of points in the NFL. So a spot that we're most likely wanting to avoid. But with that being said, with Brandon Cooks, while he was someone that we were saying to sell high at the beginning of the season, knowing that you are most likely going to get some of the worst quarterback play in the entire NFL by Davis Mills, he still had 13 targets this past week. He's almost averaging 10 targets a game, getting everything in the worst offense in the NFL. So the volume alone is going to make Brandon Cooks someone you probably have to start here at 19. Now, our next wide receiver that I know a lot of people are waiting to hear will be DK Metcalf. Okay, so with DK Metcalf, trust me, I understand that last week y'all hated my guts whenever we were coming out saying to sell DK Metcalf, and we also ranked him about at wide receiver 20 a week ago. And the thought process is, with Geno Smith playing, this overall offense is extremely capped. This is no longer the offense that you had with Russell Wilson. So while, yes, DK Metcalf is a very talented wide receiver, we don't love the matchup against the New Orleans Saints. Geno Smith is possibly the worst starting quarterback in the NFL. We're going to be avoiding everybody we can in Seattle, just like we said, a bench Tyler Lockett a week ago, just like we said, to sell high on DK Metcalf. You still have to rank Metcalf as a top 24 wide receiver just because the talent that he is. But honestly, it's kind of hard to put him in this range. Now, our last wide receiver in this tier at wide receiver 21. This is also someone that was on our sell high list a week ago, Hollywood Brown. And I know hopefully y'all aren't screaming at me in the premiere like y'all were last week whenever we had these two guys this low. But with Hollywood, like we said a week ago, I mean, this is someone that you're expecting the passing volume offense to go down for the Baltimore Ravens. The Ravens have a great offense, mainly built around the run over what we have seen historically. I think that you're actually probably going to get Lamar Jackson closer to 230, 240 passing yards a game rather than what he was previously at with 310. Also, like we said, Rashad Bateman coming in. Rashad Bateman was going to have a role in this offense. Hollywood Brown's still the wide receiver 1, like we said, but I mean, he's going to be a low-end wide receiver 2 for us. Now let's go to our last tier of wide receivers here. Let's start it off with someone that I know a lot of people are going to be surprised to see. We're going to go Jakobi Meyers at wide receiver 22. Now, currently, Jakobi Meyers is the wide receiver 42 in fantasy. And if you're going to be looking at him, the easiest way, I mean, going back to what we were talking about with touchdown volatility and just chasing volume, the easiest way to ever identify a buy low player at a given position is look at the player with the most targets without a touchdown yet in the NFL. I mean, he's had 52 targets through 6 weeks. He has yet to score a touchdown. Good matchup against the New York Jets. I'd imagine this is slightly closer than what you had it with last time whenever you had Zach Wilson throwing 4 interceptions. So yeah, Jakobi Meyers, I think he's an intriguing play. Now, our next wide receiver will be Davante Smith, someone that embarrassed us a week ago when we ranked him as a top 12 option against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, knowing that Buccaneers team literally on average had allowed their opponent to average 45 passing attempts a game. Now here against the Raiders, it's kind of a whatever matchup. I will say with Davante Smith, please do not panic. I mean, he's the same wide receiver that he was before, but Zach Ertz no longer in this offense may open up even more targets for Davante Smith. So I think we are going to be playing him at wide receiver 23. Now, our last wide receiver in our top 24, I will admit we were wrong in assuming that T.Y. Hilton was not going to be making an impact, but still we want Michael Pittman over him. Michael Pittman will be at wide receiver 24 for us. I mean, this is someone that a week ago against the Texans, very disappointing. He went from literally being up there at essentially 9 targets a game through the first 5 weeks. So then he drops down to 3 targets with T.Y. Hilton getting inserted back in. I think it's less to do about T.Y. Hilton, more to do about the overall game flow that you had in Houston. Should be a more competitive contest against the 49ers. I think we will be going Michael Pittman. And yeah, that's all I got for y'all. I really hope you enjoyed this video. I really hope y'all got something from it. Please make sure you go down there, drop that like, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, go to the description of the video, go join the flock on Patreon. That way you can join an awesome community. You can get access to rest of season rankings updated weekly at the same time, get access to our dynasty rankings, get access to our group chat, get access to a ton of things. Just go through, check it out, see if it's for you. And yeah, that's all I got for you. Really hope that you enjoyed the video and really hope that you have a great day, and I see you in the live stream tonight.